Hello there. Tonight we'll take a gentle journey into the past. A quiet story, told in soft tones, just like the old tales once shared by the firelight long ago. So, if you're ready, close your eyes, take a slow breath, and imagine yourself far away, in a colder place. A place where the winds whisper through endless forests, where pine trees sway in the dusk, and where the sea is always near. This is the North, ancient Scandinavia. Over 1,000 years ago, life was simpler and harder. The winters were long, blanketing the land in snow and silence. The earth was rocky. Food could be scarce, but the people, strong, proud, and enduring, learned to live with the cold and the dark. And from that, they forged a spirit that would echo through history. They were called the Vikingar, the people of the sea. They didn't call themselves Vikings the way we do today. To them, it was simply life, to sail, to survive, to seek something beyond the horizon. They lived in wooden houses, nestled near icy fjords. Smoke curled from chimney holes, and children listened quietly while elders told stories of the gods, of mighty Odin, wise and one-eyed, who gave all for knowledge, of Thor with his hammer and his thunder, of Loki, the trickster, and of worlds hanging on the branches of Yggdrasil, the great world tree. At night, the stars gleamed brightly over the Black Sea, and the wind sang lullabies no one remembered how to translate. But the Vikings knew what they meant. The world was vast, full of danger and mystery, and calling to them. In winter, they repaired their ships, long, narrow vessels carved from oak sleek as serpents. They stitched sails, prepared weapons, and waited for the spring thaw. And when the ice melted and the rivers ran again, they launched. Not just for war, but for trade, for exploration, for curiosity. They sailed westward toward unknown islands. They rode down great rivers into the heart of Europe. They pushed through fog and fear, always chasing what lay just beyond the next wave. Their story is not only one of battle, it's a story of resilience, of myth and memory, of a people who dared to dream across the ocean's edge. And so tonight, we begin that story, gently, from the frozen shores of Norway, where it all began, to the firelit halls of long-forgotten kings, one wave at a time. As spring painted the fjords with soft green and scattered wildflowers along the hills, the longships were made ready. These ships were unlike any others of their time, long, sleek, and silent. They could glide through the ocean's waves and slip up narrow rivers without needing a harbor. With a single sail and rows of oars manned by strong arms, they moved like living things. Each one had a carved figurehead at the prow, dragons, serpents, wolves, meant to frighten enemies and evil spirits alike. But when seen from the shore, far away, they looked like ghosts on the water. A quiet mist, a low wind, and then the silhouette of a dragon-headed ship sliding toward the land. The men aboard these ships were not all warriors. Some were traders, some farmers, some sons simply seeking their own path. But all of them were brave, because what lay ahead was unknown. The first voyages to the west were small, almost uncertain. In the late 700s, a few ships made their way across the sea and found the eastern shores of Britain. There they saw green hills and stone churches, small villages, and peaceful monks. These lands were different, richer, softer, and unguarded. In the year 793, the world heard the name Viking for the first time with fear. A monastery at Lindisfarne, an island off the northeast coast of England, was raided, not just for treasure, but as a signal. These sea people had arrived. The monks, unarmed and unprepared, were no match. Gold and silver were taken, and stories of the raid spread quickly across Europe. Some said the Northmen came from the end of the world. Others thought they were demons sent by angry gods. But to the Vikings, this was just the beginning. They returned home with treasures, crosses of gold, fine cloth, coins, and with tales. Tales of soft lands to the west, of villages without walls, of kingdoms with wealth waiting to be taken or traded for. Year by year, more ships sailed, to Ireland, to Scotland, to Francia. Some raided, some settled, and some, most surprisingly, stayed. They began to build homes. They married local women. They planted crops and raised children. What began as quick strikes turned into permanent roots. The Vikings were no longer just visitors. They were becoming part of the world they once raided. And so the sea kept calling, not only for battle now, but for something quieter, a place to live, to breathe, to begin again. The Longships sailed under skies that shifted from gold to gray, and in their silent rhythm, rowing through fog and memory, the Vikings continued west toward the next unknown shore. As the years drifted forward like low clouds over the northern seas, the Vikings changed, not in spirit, but in purpose. No longer just raiders gliding through the mist, many became settlers, builders, kings of faraway shores. Their longships no longer returned home each time. Instead, they stayed, tucked into river mouths, pulled ashore on beaches where wildflowers grew. And there, in distant lands, the Norse began to build. In Ireland, they founded towns, places like Dublin, which began as a small Viking camp beside a dark river. There were markets with traders calling out prices in many tongues, ships loaded with furs, amber, silver, and slaves. Dublin became a home not just for warriors, but for craftsmen, fishermen, and families. Norse words blended with Gaelic, cultures mixed, bloodlines too. In Scotland and the islands beyond, the Hebrides, Orkney, Shetland, the Vikings carved out small kingdoms. They sailed between the isles like stepping stones, calling themselves sea kings, ruling not over land but over waves and wind. They built wooden halls with curved rooftops, warmed by firelight and echoing with tales of gods and battles long past. To the south, in what is now France, they came not just as raiders, but as negotiators. In time, a great Viking leader named Rollo made a pact with the king of the Franks. He was granted land in exchange for peace. That land became Normandy, named for the Northmen. And there, Norse settlers became part of a new world, blending Viking boldness with Frankish culture. But it was not just west and south they turned. The Viking spirit still looked toward the edge of the map. Across the gray Atlantic, they found a cold and quiet place. Iceland was volcanic and raw, with steaming geysers and lava fields, yet hauntingly beautiful. There were no kings there, no armies, only space, freedom. And so they came, not to conquer but to live. They brought sheep, grain, sagas, and dreams. In time, they even reached Greenland, carried by nothing but wood, wind, and faith. There, on the very edge of the known world, Viking settlers built halls against the snow and stared into the western sea, wondering if it ended, or if another land lay just beyond the fog. And still, the longships came and went, their sails like wings on the water, carrying not just warriors now, but lovers, poets, builders, and stories. Always stories. Long before parchment and paper, before ink and pen, the Vikings carried their history in breath and voice. In dark winters, when snow covered the earth like a thick blanket and the wind howled outside their wooden walls, the Norse people gathered around the hearth, and there in the flicker of firelight they told stories, the Sagas. These sagas were more than tales. They were memories, lessons, warnings, dreams. They spoke of gods and giants, of men with honor and women of wisdom, of love and revenge, and the long, quiet judgment of fate. At the heart of these stories was Odin, the Allfather, a wanderer in disguise, a god who gave up his eye for knowledge and hung himself on the world tree of Yggdrasil to learn the secrets of the runes. His ravens, Hugin and Munin, thought and memory, flew across the world each day and whispered truths into his ear. There was Thor, the Thunderer, fierce and loyal, protector of gods and men. He rode in a chariot drawn by goats, wielding his hammer Mjolnir, which always returned when thrown. Children whispered prayers to him when storms rolled in. There was Loki, the trickster, neither good nor evil, only restless, a shapeshifter, a liar, a bringer of change. He danced between chaos and order, reminding gods and mortals alike that nothing remains still forever. And then there was the prophecy, Ragnarok, the end of all things, when the sky would split and wolves would swallow the sun and moon, when fire would consume the earth and gods would fall beside giants. But even then, the stories something new would rise from the ashes. These weren't just myths. They were ways of understanding the world. To the Vikings, fate was a thread woven by three mysterious sisters, the Norns. Each person's life had a path, a pattern, a place. And though a man might die with a sword in his hand, his memory, if honored, could live forever. They believed in Valhalla, the great hall of the slain, where warriors feasted and fought each day, only to rise again at dusk. But not all went there. Others went to Folkvanger, the field of the goddess Freya, or were claimed by the sea or the earth, depending on how they lived. And yet, the Norse were not grim. They laughed, they sang, they carved runes into wood and stone. They raised great stones with the names of their kin so that time would not erase them. Their poetry, called Eddas, spoke of joy, of sorrow, of the silence between stars. They knew life was brief, often brutal, but within that, they found meaning. So when you hear the word Viking, don't only think of battles, think of the storyteller, the one who remembered, the one who sat beside the fire, eyes reflecting flame, voice slow and steady, and said, "Let me tell you what was, so that you may remember what is." There comes a moment in every explorer's soul when the known ends, when the stars guide the way not homeward, but outward, into silence, into fog, into the edge of the world. For the Vikings, that moment came as they stood on the black shores of Greenland, staring westward across a cold and endless sea. Behind them lay the halls of Iceland, the fjords of Norway, the kingdoms of Europe. Ahead, nothing but water, wind, and wonder. But they had come too far to stop. The man who led them was Leif Erikson, the son of Eric the Red, the founder of the Greenland settlements. Leif was quiet, thoughtful, a man who listened to the sea. Some say he had heard stories, whispered by sailors who had drifted too far west. Tales of a place where wild grapes grew, where forests were thick and untouched, and where the land did not freeze. And so around the year 1000, Leif Erikson set sail. His ship creaked and groaned under northern skies. Days passed, then weeks. The winds grew strange, the water calmer, until at last they saw it, a coastline rising like a dream from the sea. They called it Vinland, the land of wine. Though no one knows exactly where it was, most believe it was part of what we now call Newfoundland, in present-day Canada. There were trees for timber, grass for livestock, rivers full of fish, and wild fruit hanging heavy from the vine. For a moment, it seemed they had found a new beginning. But the land was not empty. The Norse met native peoples, strong, resourceful, and watchful. The sagas speak of trade and also of tension. There was peace for a while. But misunderstandings turned to conflict, and the settlers, though brave, were few. After only a few seasons, they left Vinland behind. Still, they had touched a new world. 500 years before Columbus, Norse feet had walked the shores of North America. Their marks were small, almost invisible, but they had been there. Their story, once again, had reached farther than anyone thought possible. And so the Longships returned to Greenland, to Iceland, to Norway, and Vinland became part myth, part memory, a whisper of what could have been. But in quiet halls, where elders still told stories, children would listen with wide eyes as someone said, "Far across the western sea, beyond the last island, there is a land where grapes grow wild and the forests never end." And no one ever forgot. Even the strongest storm must pass, even the sharpest blade must dull, and even the boldest age, the age of sea kings and dragon-proud ships, must give way to time. By the 11th century, the Viking world was beginning to change. Not suddenly, not with fire or battle, but slowly, like a tide going out. Across Scandinavia, kingdoms began to rise. Chieftains who had once ruled single fjords now bowed to kings, men with crowns, thrones, and laws. Power was no longer just strength and loyalty. It became bloodlines, taxes, and treaties. And far more quietly than any sword, another force was shaping the future: Christianity. For centuries, the Norse gods had walked beside their people, in sagas, in carvings, in dreams. But now, a new faith arrived, carried not by sword alone, but by monks and missionaries. Crosses began to appear where once stood hammers. The great halls added chapels. The runestones began to speak of Christ. Some resisted, clinging to the old gods. But others saw in this new faith not just belief, but opportunity. Christian kings could form alliances. Christian lands offered trade and peace. The most famous Viking king of all, Harald Hardrada, lived and died in this shifting world. A warrior, a traveler, a poet, he fought in Byzantium, returned to rule Norway, and dreamed of one last conquest: England. In 1066, he landed with thousands of men, hoping to claim the crown. He won his first battle, but not the second. At Stamford Bridge he fell, his body pierced by arrows, his dream undone. Only weeks later, another battle would reshape England forever: the Norman conquest, by the descendants of Vikings no less. But with Harold's fall, the Viking age truly ended. No more great raids, no more distant voyages. The Longships grew old, the swords were hung on walls, the sagas became memories, and yet, in a quiet Icelandic farmhouse, someone still carved runes. By a winter fire, an old voice still whispered stories of Odin and Thor, and in the dark, the sound of waves still carried the rhythm of oars. The Vikings were gone, but their spirit had sailed too far, burned too brightly, and lived too deeply to ever truly vanish. And so, dear listener, the story fades, like mist over a northern bay. From wild fjords to forested shores, from sagas to silence, you've walked with the sea kings, and now you may rest. Now the tale is told, the Longships are docked, the fires have burned low, and the great voices of the north have grown quiet. But still, something lingers. In the hush of the wind through the trees, in the slow, steady crash of distant waves, you can almost hear the rhythm of oars, the creak of wood, the whisper of a name once spoken in a saga. The Vikings are no longer with us in flesh, but in spirit. They sail on. In every story told around a warm fire, in every map drawn toward the unknown, in every brave step taken into the fog, they are there. So close your eyes now. Let the sea carry you gently, as it carried them through storm and stillness toward the edge of the world and beyond. Sleep well, dream deep, and may your voyage be peaceful. The North remembers, and so will you.